All right, you guys, we are live. Hello, and welcome to everyone listening to the podcast or watching the Written in Melanin channel. Wherever this day may have found you, we are glad that you are here. I am CM Lockhart, and I'm here with LaCase Marie Cousineau, and this is the Written in Melanin podcast, where we aim to add some melanin to your pages. Today, as you guys can see, we will be interviewing Miss L. Penelope. She is the author of Song of Blood and Stone, as well as the Earth Singer Chronicles. And we are so excited to have her here and speak with her. And oh my gosh, I'm kind of freaking out, you guys, but it's okay. We're going to do this, and it's going to be fantastic.
I'm super happy to be here, so thanks.
All right. So, I don't even know where to begin with your questions. So, LaCase, do you want to go first? Because I need to calm
Yeah.
down.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I do. Okay. I guess we'll kind of just jump right in.
Yeah.
A question that I'm excited to ask is just to do with the lore of the world.
Mhm.
It's so rich. There's so much to it. And I think Chelsea and I both felt like we were engaged with it. But
Yes.
how did you develop that lore? What was that process like? Did it just come to you, or was it it built over time?
Yeah, it was really iterative. So the first version of the story that came to me, I basically had this dream. And I woke up the next day and I just started writing. And so I wrote the first draft in 2 days in this like spurt of inspiration. And the world was very slight. I had my main character, I had Jasminda, and it started with her on the porch with a shotgun and these men coming towards her home. And, so I just really I saw that image when I woke up that morning and I just wrote a bunch of stuff. I wrote like 21,000 words in 2 days. It was the most I'd
Wow.
ever written in at one time in one sitting, like these two sittings. And so the original world, it wasn't fleshed out at all. And so over the course of the next, I guess a year and a half before the book was ever published, as I was revising it and doing draft after draft, the world came to me in pieces as I needed it. I think my camera just cut out. Sorry, guys. Okay.
Okay.
So,
There you are.
yeah.
Yep.
Sorry. It might cut out again because it does this occasionally, and I'm really, really
Oh,
sorry.
that's okay.
It's fine.
I know how to reset it really quickly, so hopefully I can just get on it really quickly. It cuts out again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as the story came, and got more fleshed out because it was 21,000 words, and then the original self-published version that I published was like 88,000 words. So it grew a lot in
Yeah.
stages, and then the world got bigger and bigger as I needed to figure things out, and and so that when it would come to me, it was just like, oh, I have this problem. Well, what does that look like? How does this work? And I would just sit and think about it, and then something would come, and it would fit, and then I would move on to the next part.
Nice. Okay.
Wow. That's impressive. The fact that you can flesh out your world over so many reiterations of it, because
Yeah.
a lot of people are just like, this is the world, this is the confines that I've given myself, and the fact that your world kept expanding as you were writing, A, that's super impressive, and B, as a reader, you can tell that it's really well thought out, because I remember reading it and just being like, yo, this world is so complex, and
Yeah.
so there's so many moving parts to it, and it works so well, and none of it feels like it was just thrown in there at the last minute, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I love world building, and I had a big chunk. Like as I was working on the first book, I had a big chunk of it, but with each subsequent book in the series, it had to get bigger and bigger because Song of Blood and Stone is all in one country, and then the second book, Whispers of Shadow and Flame, takes place in another country, and then by the third book, we're going to other countries, and it not only expanded with that first book, but every time I'm in the world, it's like a little bit more, and without trying to like bloat it, it was stuff that was necessary. And some of it kind of felt like it was always in the back of my head and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just fleshing it out. So I really believe that a lot of the story exists in my subconscious. And part of the writing process is just bringing it forward and making it more cohesive and solid.
Yeah. Like, again, the fact that it exists in totality in the back of your mind and you can like literally just explore it versus being like, okay, like let me try to create this outside of what I really think it should be is it comes through in the book as reading really naturally. So I guess
Thanks.
that being said, like when you sit down to write, what does that look like? What is your writing process like? Is it just throwing words at the page until something feels right, or like are you an outliner, or what happens?
The process, and it grows over time, but I'm definitely an outliner. I'm definitely a plotter and a planner.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but like I said, the first draft of this was completely pantsed. So it does depend a little bit on each book and the way that it comes to me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I was just resetting the camera again. I noticed it cut out.
Okay.
So generally what happens is I'll have the idea, the kernel of the idea, whether it's like a scene, like I said, or the core of, basically this thing happens. And then I'll sit down and I'll write it out, just sort of a brief summary.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually a few pages. And then usually I can start writing from that, from having just a brief page, kind of outline.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, as I've been published by a traditional publisher and have to deal with deadlines that can be pretty strict, I've had to really refine the process a lot and do more upfront planning, which means more detailed outlines. So the outlines at the beginning have gotten longer and longer. I'm working on book 4 now, and the outline that I did was 14 pages.
Oh, wow.
And so that doesn't mean that it doesn't change over time, but I felt like in order to have a chance of writing this book as quickly as I could, I needed to, at the beginning, just put down as much as I could of the ideas that I had. Now that actually has changed quite a lot, but and then in general, the writing process is, I believe in fast drafting.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was something that I learned a few years ago that really changed my ability to actually finish books. Because for a long time, like a lot of other people who start writing, you write something and then it gets hard and you don't know how to get through it. So you don't finish it and you go to another idea. But that becomes more difficult when you're under contract. And so I fast draft, which is basically the scene that I am working on, I try to write as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then without editing. So I know I try to do at least 1 or 2 scenes a day when I'm doing the first draft. And so the whole first draft is kind of just a big mess. It's just, I don't know the whole story until I've actually written it. Mm-hmm. And then the next draft is what I call the cleaning pass. So I clean up all those things because the fast draft is really, really dirty. Like nobody else could read it. It's full of typos, spellings, people's names change halfway through, like nothing works. So no one can ever see those. And then I clean it up so that it's actually readable by another human. And then at least one more pass to polish it. And then usually another pass of tweaks and layering. By the time I get to the end, I've changed something in the beginning. So you go back and layer that in again.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the basics of how I write a full-length novel.
Okay. But I love that you're sharing that because you're the first person that I've talked to who is like, well, I just fast draft, and I know that the advice out there is that you don't try to edit and write at the same time, but a lot of us try to do that anyway. So the fact that you're like, no, the typos, nobody else can read this. I just go through it. I love that you're sharing that with us because I feel like that's something that I needed to hear as a writer, but also if you're listening to this is gold advice. You should put a star next to it in your mind and keep it there,
Right.
It really changed everything for me, trying that process. Because you're tempted to edit. You want it to look nice. You don't want to end the day feeling like I just wrote a bunch of trash. But I spent so long at the end, or I actually spent so long at the beginning, trying to make my beginnings perfect, mm-hmm. to only go back and rewrite them once I'd gotten to the end. And I was like, that was a huge waste of time. So this process really works for me. And if someone else is struggling with, finishing a book, I would suggest that they at least try it to see if it works for them.
Yeah. The hardest part of finishing a book is getting to the end, but I'm be quiet and let the case talk.
No, sorry. I feel like we're both just clamoring to ask questions, but I just wanted to kind of come back. You mentioned, and Chelsea and I know, but other people might not, that you originally published independently self-published, and then you got picked up by a traditional publisher. So what was that process like? How did that come
That's
about?
what I was going to ask too.
Oh, you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was completely a surprise. So I have a history of DIY things, and I had co-founded a literary magazine and had been an independent filmmaker. And so I when I was like, oh, I think I can finish this book. I think this is actually the first book I will get to the end of and be really proud of. And so I naturally just thought about self-publishing it. And so this was about 2014, and I was doing all this research on self-publishing and listening to podcasts. And so at the beginning of January 15, Song of Blood and Stone came out, and I actually published the second one in, I think it was October or November of that same year. And so I was working on the third one. And so it was the beginning of the next year when, just through my website contact form, I got an email from an editor at St. Martin's Press, Monique Patterson. And I had heard of her because she's Black. She's one of the few Black women editors in traditional publishing. And I knew that she liked science fiction and fantasy, but I was really focused on self-publishing the series and getting it done. Yeah. And so somehow she had found the book. I'd been trying to market it and do my best as an indie to get the book out there. And it worked to some degree because she found it. And she read the two that were on the market. And originally she asked me to pitch her a new idea. And so I spent a few weeks like just nervously figuring out how to pitch, because I'd done all my research in self-publishing. I had done no research on agents and editors and the traditional publishing world. I just, had focused in on an indie. So, but I did have a new idea for a new series. So like I just did all this research on pitches and I sent her something. And then I didn't hear back for a while, which I knew was normal. But so I went on with, getting book 3 ready to publish. And so it was actually the day that I sent book 3 to the copy editor that I heard back from her. And she had said she liked the pitch, but she was really interested in Song of Blood and Stone. She really loved that book, and she thought that she could bring it to a wider audience. So would I consider republishing it with St. Martin's? And that's how it started. And I was just amazed because that was never a thing. Like I knew it happened occasionally, but like of course you can't plan for something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I didn't have an agent at the time. I have a bunch of friends who are lawyers, and one recommended a literary attorney to me. So I did the deal with a literary attorney. And then a few months later, my editor was like, you should probably think about getting an agent. That would make things easier for you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I eventually did get an agent.
Okay. Wow. That.
Yeah.
Like
it really is rare, but it's so cool to hear that it happened. I think, sorry, Chelsea, I didn't mean to jump in on you, but
you're articulating what I'm thinking, so go ahead.
That's why we work together. I feel like we have become one mind.
Yes, we're really a hive mind.
Yeah.
We're like the Power Rangers.
Yeah.
Or Voltron.
Power Rangers. I get to be the blue one.
Definitely. Oh no, I want to be yellow. Okay, sorry. What was I gonna say? Oh gosh, help me, hive mind. Just we hear about I don't know, like I feel like there's this like dream that it has to happen one certain way with traditional publishing. Like you write the book and it's the next great American novel, and then you find an agent and then you get published. And I think it's really good for people to hear that there is no right way to do it and there's no wrong way to do it. Well, giving up is I feel like sometimes that they're like, don't give up on yourself, but just like, I don't know, trust that journey and write what you believe in when the time comes. And I don't know, like if you had given up, we wouldn't have this amazing book. We wouldn't have this to talk about.
And
like, go on.
No, I was gonna say, just like to add to that, I like that, like by you sharing your story, like I don't want to say like you're living the dream, but there are a lot of people out there who are like, I want the right people to see my book, and like you're literally sharing your story of how like I just did what I knew that I had to do, and like the right people came across it, and then this happened. It's not that you gave up on traditional publishing or that you thought it was wrong or bad or anything. You're like, this is the route that I'm going to take, and then when another route presented itself, you're like, okay, well, this is a good route. I'm going to take this one instead, or two, or however.
Exactly.
And I love that because it's just like there are so many different ways to achieve the same goal. And it's just like your book was still out in the world. It was still influencing people. It was still like you're still sharing it with people. And it just, like things happen for a reason. I'm a firm believer in that. And I'm just like so excited that it got into the hands that it needed to be in, because like again, I don't know like how many people know this. I think I told the case, and I think I told you on Twitter when I reached out to you. Like when I found your book, it was just sitting on a shelf in Barnes and Noble, and I was just like, "Yo, this is the only book in this entire store with a black girl on the cover. Let me pick this up."
Yeah.
And then I read the back of it, and I was like, this sounds amazing. And then I remember I went to my husband, because we were in the store and we were at separate places, and he was like just roaming, waiting for me to be done. And I was like, can I buy this? And he was like, yes, we can leave.
I can finally get out of here. I can just say that.
He's like, it's just one book? Yes, let's go.
He's happy you were buying like 10,000.
Right?
Always. Yeah.
And I was just like, this says book 1. I was like, there has to be other books. And then I saw your picture in the back of the book. I was like, yeah, she's a black woman and she's amazing. Like, I'm going to read this. I don't care what it's about.
That's awesome.
So I say that to say that like things for like truly happen for a reason. And I'm just, that's why I'm so excited to be talking to you, because like your journey is unique, and your book in and of itself is so unique, because for those of you who are watching this or listening to this, you know, in the future, you know, if you don't know what Song of Blood and Stone is about, I guess, you know, we can actually tell you that, because it is an amazing book. And since we have the wonderful author here, like, could you tell us and our listeners, like, exactly what Song of Blood and Stone, Breath of Dust and Dawn, the Earth Singer Chronicles as a whole is kind of about?
Sure. So the pitch, Song of Blood and Stone, is about a young woman who lives in a place where there's 2 countries that have been at war for 500 years, and off and on, and she's biracial. And so she lives sort of at the edge of society, and is an orphan. And so one day these soldiers come to her isolated home with a captive soldier, and he's a captive spy. And so she saves the life of the spy, and they actually have to go on a journey to awaken a sleeping goddess to save their country from war. And in the midst of this, there's a refugee crisis, and there's, you know, racial tension and magic, people with magic versus people without magic. So there's a lot of ways that it mimics our current society and our current world. And the whole series, basically the Earth Singer Chronicles, which it will be 4 novels and at least 3 novellas, is about this world and these 2 peoples and whether or not they can come together and be unified or not.
Doesn't it just sound amazing, you guys? Like, it is. And
it is. It really is.
like, there are so many moving parts to this book that I feel like you do so well, because like there's the main, what I consider like the main storyline with Jack and just Jasminda, and you know, their adventure to, you know, awaken the queen who sleeps. And there's also the story with Ben and Ella, and she's trying to take on like this giant entity to get her nephew back. And I love how all the characters that you introduce, like, they play a role into it, just like in the real world. Like, you never know who you're meeting in the most, like, mundane of situations. Mm-hmm. And I love how that plays a part into it as a whole. So, like, when you were writing it, was it always, like, these parts that overlap and coincide? Or was it something that came later? And like, how did you figure out how to incorporate that into your story? Because I feel like that would be such a hard thing to do.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is there are 3 versions of Song of Blood and Stone. So you read the special edition, which is the paperback with the illustrated cover. Yes, the self-published version. So when St. Martin's Press bought the series, I did a big revision on the 2 books that had been out at the time. I had to take them off the market. And so Song of Blood and Stone, story is the same. If anyone out there has read the self-published version, it's still about Jack and Jasminda, still the same story, but it's like a lot different, but the same, which is hard to describe.
Yeah.
And so they put out the hardcover. So and Ella's story did not appear until the special edition. So basically what happened was, after the hardcover version came out, my editor was like, we're going to make some changes and some additions for the paperback and kind of relaunch. And what I want you to do is to write a novella and weave it in through, which is, it sounds hard because it was very hard. And most people have never heard of being asked to do anything like that. So I think that the publisher, they really wanted to hit the fantasy market, the adult fantasy shelves. And I had written it more as originally as a romance, as a fantasy romance, which it still is. Like, I'm very committed to my love stories in my books, and I always want to have a love story. Yeah, I just love reading them. Like, I don't want to read a book without a love story. Like, why? But I know that, when you deal with traditional publishers, there's definitely pros and cons. And so, and it's not necessarily a con, it's just they had their ideas on a specific market. And I think they want it to be longer and more fantasy-ish. And so I ended up writing an additional 40,000 words, which is Ella and Ben's story, and which I absolutely love. Like, now that I look back on it, I absolutely love their story. And Ella, Ben was always in the book in a very small role. He was always Jack's assistant. And so some of this was pulling in things that were going to be in future books, just pulling them in earlier and pulling in ideas and concepts. But it ended up being a lot to manage, and trying to do it gracefully and not make it feel like, why is this extra story here that doesn't quite connect? They're parallel. And in book 2, in Whispers of Shadow and Flame, it's a similar thing. There's different stories that are running parallel that are connected but not obviously. And then when book 3 comes out in August, hopefully everybody will see what I was going for and everything comes together. You do have to wait a little bit, but yeah, managing the different perspectives and because it kind of going from a 2 POV, kind of more traditional back and forth love story, to something where it's a lot more. It's just wider. You're seeing more of the world. You're seeing more characters and more plot lines, and weaving that together so it still feels like a cohesive book was a huge challenge. And so I'm glad that it's working for you guys, because I was concerned about that, but it was something that I worked really hard on, trying to make all the pieces fit.
Yeah, I don't know about you, LaCase, because this is actually something that we didn't get to talk about when we first talked about the book. I genuinely enjoyed the different perspectives, because I felt like the way you did it expanded the world in a way that didn't feel forced. And I think that's where that natural, reading tone came from, is because, the way Ella sees the world is not the same way that Jasminda sees the world. And I feel like that shows a completely different aspect of, the entire country as a whole. And that's something
what I was going for. So that's awesome. I'm super glad that you got that out of it. That's always wonderful to hear.
So I loved it. Now I'm not even gonna lie. After that first chapter, I was just when it switched to Ella, I was like, oh, where's Jack and Jasminda? I need to know what's happening. Don't do this to me.
Right.
But I seeing the bigger picture. I was just okay, this is why it's done this way, because you wouldn't really be able to understand what Portside is and what all it represents and everything that's happening in the world. And, even with, no spoilers, but everything that was going on with Jack and, the prince, you really wouldn't have really understood that if you didn't get it from Ella's perspective. So I genuinely just loved it all the way around.
I think it's a really good testament to being flexible as a writer and quality editor. If you had fought against it, I don't know, it really did kind of, I haven't read the original, I've just read this version, but it really did open up the world. So I think it's just really cool that you are willing to receive that and then work with it, because the book is phenomenal. So I don't know. I think it's a hard thing for writers to do the kill your darlings thing or expand what you already think is perfect. So, it's important.
I knew that it wasn't perfect. And there's always room for improvement. And I do trust my editor. And she really wanted to expand the world. That was something she focused on. And so, I thought about it. I don't want to do anything that's going to take away from the book. So can I do what she's asking me to do in a way that's going to actually enhance the book? And so I did struggle with that. But I thought of this, then I started thinking of all of the possibilities that it gave me, which was really exciting. And so as hard as it was, it's totally made me a better writer. And it allowed me to deepen this story that I really love. And like I said, bring in other things earlier so that the ground is set. So you do understand these things and all of these forces at play a little bit earlier than I was going to put them in, on my own. And so having a great editor that you trust and that it believes in the work and the world was really important. Definitely.
Yeah.
I can see that, because as writers, we can sort of get in our own heads and be like, oh, I know everything that's going on in the story. So
Yeah.
it's like, clearly everybody else will understand this. And then somebody else will read it and be like, wait a
What?
second.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I've had beta readers who are like, okay, Leslie, no, this is not working. You have to tell me what's happening here. So people that you trust to give you feedback is important.
Yes.
Beta readers, critique partners, editors, somebody who is not yourself,
Everything.
who is going to be
Yes.
completely honest with you. They are critical to writing
Absolutely.
a good book.
Absolutely.
So I thank everybody who told you off on your behalf, because like when I tell you that we love this book, it's true. I keep saying that, but it is what it is.
I appreciate it.
That being said, like I kind of want to know what, like, is there anything, any books, writings, movies, creative works of any type sort that like inspired you to become a writer, to pursue this, like anything that comes to mind?
I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I was always a big reader. I think so. Just reading in general, like when I was a kid, I would read the classics. So like Jane Eyre, Jane Austen books. I loved things like The Secret Garden, and then also Black books. At a certain point, I was only reading Black books, and I was only reading Toni Morrison and Gloria Naylor. So books like that were just foundational. But I've always written, and so I think that choosing to write speculative fiction, fantasy, and paranormal are in large part because of television shows that I watched. So growing up, I loved The Twilight Zone. That was my mom's favorite show. So we watched a lot of Twilight Zone and Outer Limits. And then I loved Twin Peaks and X-Files.
Yes.
And so those kind of shows were big influences on just looking at the world in a different way and trying to kind of interpret the real life things that are hard and painful and put a fantasy lens on them. If you cast them as a monster, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with, some things. So
Yeah.
I think that the genre influences are more specific and just loving reading in general was what made me a writer.
I love that because I've talked to several writers, and like we generally fall into one of two categories. Either I was always a reader and I was always a writer and I knew that I wanted to do this, or like I found this love later in life and I was just like, I don't know why I didn't know about this sooner.
Right.
So
Yeah.
That's true.
yeah, and it's just like I am, like, personally, I'm really glad that you wrote your book, because it's like there's tends to be this void where Black girls can't be magical, which is kind of crazy, especially in the realm of like sci-fi and fantasy. You don't see a whole lot of main characters like Jasminda, or even the entire like country of Lagrimar that you created. Like you don't get to see people with like who look like us with magic and tackling the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis in their book, and doing it in let's say a really classy way, or being able to like weave in other elements to it. So it's like, I'm really glad that you wrote the book and you were honest to the way that people react and the way that people feel and the way that people deal with things that like are true, like having to deal with discrimination for like absolutely no reason at all, or having to essentially take on a bigger monster than what it seems like you can take on, like with Jack and Jasminda having to literally wake a goddess. Like, how do you deal with something like that? Like, somebody comes onto your porch one day, you're like ready to shoot them with your shotgun, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm about to go wake a sleeping goddess. You want to come with me?
Right. I think like when you make it fun like that, you help people deal with things. That's the great thing about reading and how it takes you away, but there's still, analogs to real situations that you might have to face. So that's what's great about it.
Absolutely. So, okay. There are so many things that we want to ask you, but they are very, very book specific. So we are going to wrap up your video here. I have one more question for you, and then we will have like a spoilery book talk, and that will be up on the channel probably later today or tomorrow if you guys are watching this. So if you're watching this in the future, it's already on the channel, so go watch it. But if you're watching the live stream right now, it'll be up later today or later this week, so keep an eye out for that. But the last question that I wanted to ask you for everyone is, obviously you are a amazing writer. So if you could go back and give yourself any writing advice, you know, like at a younger age, what advice would you give yourself?
There was a period when I didn't write, and I came back to it after a few years, like as an adult, you know. And so I think if to give myself my earlier self advice would be just to believe in yourself, you know, like it was you can't self-publish if you don't really believe in yourself and don't need that external validation. And that can be really hard for artists because we're sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So just that extra push to keep going, don't let the fears and the fear of sharing your work and the fear of possible criticism stop you. Because I know that if I had kept going all the way through, I'd probably even be a better writer, and I might have started earlier. Who knows? So yeah, just believe in yourself and keep going. I mean, I guess it's kind of like normal advice, but creative people need to hear it sometimes. They need that extra push to push through the hard times, you know.
Absolutely. That being said, like I am good for like the non-spoilery questions. Case, do you have any? And if you guys are watching this live, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will ask Penelope for you. So yeah.
Oh, I do have one more. And if you can't answer, but
Okay.
can you tell us what you have next? You have maybe like a genre you're gonna write in, or
After the series?
Mm-hmm.
So this book 4, last book in Earth Singer Chronicles, is due in about 2.5 weeks. So I have been thinking about what I'm working on next after I rest.
right.
I have a couple of ideas. I feel like I'll always be, I mean, never say never, but I feel like I'll always be a little bit in the speculative fiction genre.
Okay.
So I can't say for sure, but I have a YA paranormal thriller that is burning to be finished.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited about. And then I also have the story that I'd started and then I haven't had time to get back to, which is a contemporary / near future portal fantasy with dragons. And
yes.
I'm living for it right now.
Right? So those are both like, they've got drafts of, they are terrible drafts as we've discussed, but like they really want to be finished. So we'll see which one gets first, you know.
We'll keep an eye out for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, this was fun. This was so fun. I love doing this.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah.
But all right, for everyone watching this video, this is it for the live stream. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up. We are all on YouTube, so you can check us out. You can check LaCase out at From LaCase Marie, and you can check Penelope out. Check Penelope out at Leslie Penelope. So follow us all on YouTube, subscribe to our channels, do all that great fun stuff that you know that you're supposed to do. And that is it for this live stream. There are links to everything down in the description box, so feel free to check that out. And until next time, we hope your days are lovely and your books are interesting. Bye, you guys.